I had been in love with him for many years. When I finally summoned up the courage to confess my love, he said I was disgusting. Malia, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and offer a toast to President Ronan. My boss pushed me, his eyes showing reproach. I looked at the man sitting in the main seat of the private room. He was leaning his ear to listen to what the person beside him was saying and didn't seem to notice the commotion here. It had been a long time since I last saw him. It took me a great deal of effort to tear my eyes away from him. Some people are like that. Just sitting there, doing nothing, is enough to make people feel fond of them. Finally, he got free and turned his gaze to our side. His eyes were deep, his pair of eyes were unusually dark, but his expression was completely calm. No one could guess what he was thinking. My boss gave me a secret push. I stood up, maintaining a not too deep nor too shallow smile on my face. President Ronan, I'd like to offer you a toast. He just stared at me fixedly, without saying a word or making any movement. At that moment, I felt that he was the superior who held the power of life and death. The private room fell silent. Since they couldn't figure out Ronan's thoughts, they all looked at me. My boss broke out in a cold sweat secretly. He was bound to regret making me offer a toast to Ronan. Ronan might have had the idea of cooperating with them before, but after seeing me, the possibility of cooperation would be greatly reduced. Actually, Ronan is a very rational person. He is used to weighing the pros and cons of everything. Acting on impulse hardly ever happens to him. But I had been classified into the harmful side by him a long time ago. He firmly believed that I was a nuisance and therefore hated it very much when I showed up in front of him. If I had known in advance that he would be here, I would have tried every means to get out of this damn dinner party. I had thought that he wouldn't come to an occasion of this level. At most, he would send a department manager to discuss this cooperation. Just when I was about to drink up the wine to save face, Ronan picked up the wine glass in front of him. At that moment, I heard my boss let out a sigh of relief secretly. My boss brought me here because he thought my appearance was a pass. He hoped that I could win a little favor from Ronan and make him agree to this cooperation. This trick might work on others, but in Ronan's case, it was actually not even as likable as a joke. The reason he agreed to the cooperation might just be that the benefits of this cooperation outweighed the disadvantage that I represented. When the dinner party was halfway through, Ronan was called away by a phone call. He is a person who cares a lot about his plans and seldom changes his itinerary because of something, except for the person he adores. I can't think of anyone else who could make him leave halfway. After the people on Ronan's side left, my boss cheered, "Come on, come on. This cooperation was only possible because of Malia. Let's offer her a toast." I put away the tinge of bitterness in my heart and picked up the wine glass. After drinking too much wine, the private room became noisier. I made an excuse to leave. When I got up, I accidentally tripped over a chair. "Malia, are you okay?" My boss held me, but in a place where others couldn't see. His right hand stayed on my waist for a long time and wouldn't leave. I forced myself to endure the discomfort and broke free from him, running to the corridor, but all I could see in front of me were Ronan's deep eyes. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my boss. "Malia, come with me tonight?" The slippery touch on my waist seemed to still linger, making me feel sick. I turned off my phone and sighed in my heart. It was time to look for a new job again. The corridor was dim. "Ah, I told you long ago to come and work for me. That fat-headed and big-eared boss of yours. You should have slapped him hard just now to see if he still dares to harass you." Grace's voice came through the phone, which made me feel much better. "I haven't resigned yet." I stamped on the floor hard, but the voice-activated lights didn't turn on as expected. The voice-activated lights are broken again. "Your old neighborhood isn't a good place to live either. I think you should move in with me when you change jobs. We can also take care of each other." I casually agreed and clamped the phone between my ear and shoulder. Looking down to search for my keys while walking, there was a faint smell of tobacco lingering around my nose. I looked up and saw a flickering faint red light. I couldn't see the person's face clearly. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I didn't know whether I should run first or go home first. Grace noticed my silence. "Malia, why aren't you talking?" The person looked up, and the keys in my hand fell to the ground. With a click, the sound was messy. Malia. My heart was trembling violently. I'm okay. I'm home. I'll talk to you later. I hung up the phone. Ronan threw the almost burned out cigarette on the ground and stubbed it out with his toe. Back? His tone was casual, as if we were just old friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. I was really startled. After calming down, I asked, "Why are you here?" Ronan didn't answer me. He bent down to pick up the keys, planning to change jobs? Because of me? Or because of Tom? Tom was my boss. He had heard my conversation with Grace. Of course not because of you. This man was as confident as ever. Really? He looked me up and down, his voice cold. I heard that as long as you are present at a dinner party, the cooperation can surely be negotiated. His expression was disdainful. I understood what he meant. In his eyes, I was a person who would use her body to exchange for benefits. I subconsciously wanted to argue, but when I opened my mouth, I couldn't say anything. His next sentence sent me straight to hell. You and your mother are really alike. He was too smart and knew exactly how to hit others' sore spots. If there's nothing else, you can go. Ronan played with the bunch of keys, and finally, there was a change in his expression on his face. Not bad. You've learned to talk back. He grabbed my jaw tightly, about to say something, but my tears fell first. Ronan froze for a moment, then wiped away the tears on my face, and mocked me without sparing any effort. Tisk, tsk, tsk. Looking like this again, Malia. Do you use this look to please every man? This man was always like this. He was taciturn in front of others, and every word he said was like an imperial edict, but behind others' backs, he would only bully me and make me feel embarrassed. I opened my mouth and bit him hard. Ronan winced in pain, his brow slightly furrowed, but he didn't let go. I lifted my leg, trying to kick him, but he easily dodged and instead grabbed my ankle. He pressed on step by step, forcing me to the door. Ronan, I'm not as bad as you say. He raised an eyebrow, didn't say anything but just got closer. I wanted to push him away, but it was like an ant trying to shake a big tree, all in vain. What on earth do you want? You. His voice was hoarse. He clearly hated me, but he came to humiliate me like this. Perhaps in his eyes, I was just a pet that he could call and dismiss at will. Ronan, you're a psycho. After saying this, I regretted it. I'm probably the first person who dared to shout at him like this. But Ronan didn't seem to care. Instead, he lowered his head and kissed my neck. Suddenly, I remembered something and sneered. Ronan, what do you think will happen if Olivia knows what you're doing to me now? Ronan stopped his movements and looked up at me unblinkingly. After a long while, he sneered, she's not a fool. How could she believe your words? He was right. Olivia was his first love, the person he adored. Of course, he had told her everything. Anyone who knew Ronan would naturally think that Ronan couldn't force himself to be with someone he hated. If I said that I had had a relationship with Ronan, they would only think I was crazy. A sense of damn helplessness welled up in my heart. I think I must have looked ugly when I was crying, so Ronan let me go with little interest. He opened the door with the keys and left without looking back. Ronan's appearance made me sleepless until 3 o'clock in the morning. When I opened my eyes, I had already missed the time to clock in at work. I quickly got myself together and rushed to the company. The resignation letter had been drafted a long time ago. I had already had the idea of resigning. When the colleague at the adjacent workstation saw the thing in my hand, she said sarcastically, "Oh, where are you going to be a rich lady? You don't even want your job anymore? No wonder you're late today." Her tone was ambiguous and her eyes fell on my neck. There was a purple-blue mark there, which was left by Ronan last night. I had been in such a hurry to go out that I forgot to cover it. Another person chimed in, "Yeah, Malia, coming so late. That man must be quite good, right?" I took a deep breath and tried to suppress the anger in my chest. "This is my private matter and has nothing to do with you." After saying that, I walked towards Tom's office without looking back. "Oh, Malia, why are you here?" Tom's eyes were naked. After closing the door, he even looked me up and down several times without restraint. I handed him the resignation letter, but he just put it in the drawer without even looking at it. Then he walked up to me. I turned around and took a few steps warily to the empty space beside me. Why did you leave without saying a word yesterday? Tom was smiling, and the fat on his face squeezed out one wrinkle after another, looking disgusting. Malia, the current employment environment is not good. The competition is fierce. And you're a woman. You definitely can't compete with others outside. I unceremoniously knocked off his right hand that was about to rest on my shoulder. Director Tom, please sign it. Malia, stay. I guarantee I won't treat you badly. Tom was still up to no good, and behind me was the desk. There was no room for me to retreat anymore. Director Tom, please show some respect. As long as you sign it, I'll pretend I didn't see the message you sent me yesterday. Otherwise, I paused. I guarantee that everyone in the company will see it. Are you threatening me? Tom suddenly grabbed my shoulder, but his eyes suddenly fixed on my neck. His eyes became even more lewd. I thought you were some innocent girl, but you're just someone anyone can ride. Before Tom could finish his sentence, I kicked him. I used some force, and he let out a howl. Taking advantage of the moment when he was in pain, I tried to run outside, but he grabbed me and due to inertia, I fell to the ground. The commotion was so loud that the people outside the office must have heard it too. It's just that they didn't have the courage to push the door open and come in for the time being. Tom was enraged. You're asking for trouble by rejecting my kindness. He walked closer and closer, his eyes fierce and smug. My hand was groping on the desk. In a panic, I only managed to find a fountain pen and stabbed it into his arm. Taking this opportunity, I quickly got up. Malia. Offend me. I'd like to see how you can survive in Rouen City in the future. His furious voice came from behind. I had no time to pay attention to it. But when I opened the door, I bumped into a warm embrace. Director Tom is really throwing his weight around. Before I could see the face of the person clearly, I was only focused on putting some distance between us. But I accidentally stepped on a black pen that had rolled onto the floor and uncontrollably fell backward. The person who came was quick-eyed and deft-handed. He held my waist to steady me. Sister, be careful. It was a very good-looking young man, tall and slender, with curly chestnut hair and clear eyes, like the eyes of a fawn. I came to my senses and quickly broke free from his embrace. He shrugged and his eyes passed over me and finally settled on Tom. The office was in a mess. Only then did I realize that in a moment of panic, I had accidentally swept everything on the desk onto the floor. My current situation surely wasn't any better than this office. Tom quickly composed his facial expression and there was a hint of flattery in his tone. Young President Stephen, what brings you here? The young man didn't answer him. Instead, he asked me, Sister, what do you want to do? I'll uphold justice for you. His tone was like playing house, and I found it a bit funny. Tom got panicked and said, Young President Stephen, you've misunderstood. We were just kidding around. The young man still ignored him. With his beautiful eyes fixed on me, he said leisurely, By the way, sister, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Stephen. I'm Malia. There was anticipation in his eyes. I continued. After hearing my words, his eyebrows raised slightly, and he had a sincere and enthusiastic smile. Tom couldn't figure out what he was thinking and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Young President Stephen, I heard what you just said. I'm just not sure if you meant it. His tone was cautious. Young President Stephen, you're joking. I was just scaring her. I didn't mean anything else. Stephen smiled at me, showing a row of neat teeth. Sister, is what he said true? I shook my head. The people outside the office were all craning their necks, trying to peek at this farce. Director Tom might as well consider looking for a new job. Your work style is really unacceptable. As soon as he said this, there was an uproar both inside and outside the office. I heard voices of discussion. No way. Who is this guy? The young master of the Lucci Group. When he says something, there's no room for the rest of us to object. Tom was sweating profusely. His expression was blank for a moment, but soon he realized that Stephen wasn't joking. Young President Stephen, what do you mean? I didn't do anything. Tom's face was gloomy and the look he gave me was full of hatred. I felt extremely happy and couldn't help but look at Stephen gratefully several times. He winked at me. Before leaving the office, a blue jacket was placed on my shoulders. Stephen took my wrist and led me into the elevator. I did you a big favor, sister. How are you going to thank me? He was getting closer and closer to me. For a moment, I didn't know how to react. He laughed and there was warmth in his eyebrows. Sister, please treat me to a meal. Okay. Unfortunately, I have something to do today. We can't make it today. Then let's talk about it next time. The elevator opened on the basement floor. I was so busy gloating over Tom's comeuppance that I forgot to press the floor button. Let's go. I'll take you home. I waved my hand to decline, but he became serious and said earnestly, this is what a gentleman should do. Unable to persuade him otherwise, I had to agree. His car was a blue Porsche, which looked very expensive. I was a bit hesitant. Was he really an adult? Did he have a driver's license? He sensed my thoughts and took out his driver's license from his pants pocket and said, don't worry. Sit. After I got into the passenger seat, he didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he bent down to look for something, found it. His tone was extremely excited, his eyes bright, shining like the starry sky I saw in the countryside when I was a child. In his hand was a medicine box. Following his gaze, I noticed that there was a long cut on my calf. It wasn't deep, but it looked a bit scary. Stephen held a cotton swab in his hand and his movements were gentle, but it still hurt. I couldn't help but suck in a breath. He blew on it gently, it won't hurt in a while. It was a strange feeling. Since I became an adult, I had seldom been treated like this. From my perspective, I could just see the shadow of his eyelashes on his face. I suppressed the emotion surging in my heart. Okay. Try not to get the wound wet today. After saying that, he smiled at me and then started the car. Stephen liked to laugh, and each smile was sincere and enthusiastic. It was completely different from Ronan. When he looked at me, his smile rarely reached his eyes. Stephen sent me home. After I went upstairs, I took a look out of the window. He was leaning against the car, looking up at my place. I don't know why, but I immediately moved away from the window. What did you go to do? Ronan's sudden voice startled me. The living room light was off. He was sitting on the sofa, with a nearly burned out cigarette between his fingers. Only then did I remember that he had taken my keys that day. But I didn't say anything. I closed the door and turned on the light. His eyes fell on the wound on my leg side and he narrowed them slightly. I hoped he would say something, but at the same time, I didn't want him to speak. There were always words I didn't like to hear coming out of his mouth. How did you get it? Does it have anything to do with you? His eyebrows furrowed even tighter. He stood up and walked up to me. I couldn't help but step back, but there was the door behind me and I had nowhere to retreat. Ronan sneered, grabbed my arm and unceremoniously pushed me onto the sofa. I couldn't figure out what he was going to do. We were in a stalemate like this. His eyes were dark and sharp, as if he could see through everything. I had nowhere to hide under such a gaze. He sighed and looked around. Where's the medicine box? I've already applied the medicine. I pursed my lips and added, don't worry about it. He ignored me and just rummaged through the cabinets. That's just the way he was. Once he decided to do something, he had to do it. I said, it's under the TV cabinet. Ronan got the medicine box and crouched in front of me. He held my ankle. His fingertips were cold. It had been a long, long time since I had looked at him like this. I couldn't figure out what he was thinking. He clearly hated me so much, hated my mother so much, but he still showed up in front of me again and again. His every move was enough to rekindle those delusions in my heart. I looked down at him. I used to trace his face with my fingers bit by bit. His thick black eyebrows were like ink stains on rice paper, placed on his brow bone. His nose was high and straight. His thin lips were pursed into a straight line, looking extremely cold. Ronan was good-looking. He had been the focus of attention in the crowd since he was a child. He didn't seem to notice my gaze. He just kept his head down, looking serious and being careful with his actions. As if he were handling a priceless treasure. I found this thought of mine funny. He wouldn't treat me like that. Maybe he would have in the past, but definitely not now. Ronan looked up and his eyes met mine directly. I was a bit flustered. The throbbing in my heart seemed to burst out at this moment, but before I could react, Ronan kissed me. At first, it was just a light kiss, as if he was deliberately teasing me. I hugged his neck. Ronan paused and let out a very pleasant chuckle. He deepened the kiss. He was always like this. He always wanted me to please him before he would respond to me. I don't know how long it had been when Ronan finally let me go. I was a mess. But he still looked as cold as ever. Except for his slightly red lips, there wasn't even a trace of different color in his eyes. Ronan loosened his tie and got up to leave. I stared at him straight, bit my lip and said, "Ronan, what do you think of me?" He stopped and looked back at me, the mockery in his eyes was all too familiar to me. My breathing stopped for a moment and my heart sank inch by inch. Just when I thought he wouldn't answer, he asked me, "What do you want to be?" What did I want to be? Before I was 15, I always thought that Ronan was special to me. Later, I gradually realized that this specialness was the same as how he treated a dog or a cat. There was nothing special about it. The gap between us was something I could never cross in my lifetime. Before I was 15, I dreamed of becoming his wife, the person he cherished most. Before I was 18, I humbly craved just a little bit of his attention. Now, I lowered my eyes and shook my head gently. "Ronan, I don't like you anymore." My voice was shaking uncontrollably. I took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eyes. "Let's just pretend that we never knew each other." It was extremely quiet around. After a while, "Okay." I met Ronan when I was 5 and he was 10. At that time my father had just passed away. My mother, who had been divorced for a few years, took me into the Ronan family. Mr. Ronan was a kind man. My mother had been a nanny in the Ronan family for many years, so she dared to make this request. For the Ronan family, it was just a matter of having one more pair of chopsticks. When I first arrived at the Ronan family, it was spring. A young man was standing on the steps outside the door with a riot of colorful flowers behind him. Most of my childhood memories are blurred, but I clearly remember that scene. He was so good-looking that he stood out too much. He looked cold and aloof, and when he lowered his eyes, there was a sense of inexplicable loneliness which even overshadowed the begonias behind him. My mother held my hand and called out respectfully, "Young master." I followed suit. He looked at me, tilted his head, showing a bit of interest. I got nervous for no reason and grabbed my mother's sleeve. But he reached out and rubbed the top of my head. His voice was still a bit childish, but it sounded incredibly nice. "You're so cute." When we got to know each other better, I always liked to run around after him. Later, even his childhood friends knew about my existence and always liked to tease me, saying that I was Ronan's little follower. Ronan just gave them a sideways glance and rubbed the top of my head again. "I think you guys are just jealous." His palm was warm. I swallowed a mouthful of cream and my eyes narrowed with sweetness. When I was 13, I was allowed to go to the same middle school as Ronan. It was a famous noble middle school in Rouen City, and the people there were either rich or noble. For the daughter of a servant, it was a great gift. I didn't know my place back then. Soon I was isolated by the other classmates in the class. Once, when Ronan came to pick me up, I was being cornered by them. "She's just the daughter of a servant. What right does she have to be with us? I even feel dirty sitting next to her." His voice was cold and indifferent, but there was suppressed anger in his eyes. "Do you know what you're doing?" The 17-year-old boy was already dazzlingly remarkable. Those who were watching the fun made way for him. "That's the way the world is, the law of the jungle." Ronan crouched down and put his coat on me. He pulled me up and slowly swept his eyes over everyone. Under such a gaze, those rich kids who had always been haughty and arrogant were all silent. That was the first time I had seen him in a month. At that time, he had gone to the summer camp organized by University A and was admitted to University A without taking the entrance examination with excellent grades. He came back this time to report the good news to the couple of the Ronan family. I didn't even hear clearly what he said. I just stared at him fixedly. when someone cut up my school uniform, I didn't cry. When someone splashed dirty water on me, I didn't cry. When someone disliked me and cursed at me, I didn't cry. But at that moment, all the past grievances and longing hit me, and I was crying uncontrollably. Ronan was also flustered and actually picked me up horizontally and walked straight out. The cold aura of the young boy surrounded me. I held onto his neck and was crying so hard that I could hardly catch my breath. Malia, it's okay now. He patted my back from time to time and his tone was obviously full of heartache. No. Don't want to go home. I was sobbing and couldn't even say a complete sentence. But he understood and told the driver to turn around and took me to that dessert shop that I loved the most. I finally calmed down. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his wrinkled white shirt and was reluctant to lift my head. Had enough crying? Ronan pinched my nose and laughed softly. After that, he came to pick me up every day, regardless of the weather, until he left for university. Ronan was really nice to me back then. So I naturally thought that as long as I reached out, I could reach him. Malia, what are you looking at? Grace came over with a pillow in her arms. Her eyes swept over the screen of my mobile phone. You're still thinking about him, huh? I shook my head and closed the page on the browser. I clicked on it by accident. This stinking playboy. Which female star is he flirting with again? Ronan had a lot of gossip, both true and false. Come to think of it, for someone like him, just standing there was enough to attract bees and butterflies. Grace held my face. Malia, be good. Let's not think about him anymore. After separating from Ronan, I was depressed for a long time. Fortunately, Grace was with me. I moved out of the old neighborhood and lived with her. Thanks to her help, I even got a new job. I couldn't live in Ronan's shadow forever. I would start a new life. This big dream that had lasted for nearly 20 years should have woken up long ago. Grace winked at me. Since you've made up your mind to break up with him, why don't you consider President Little Steven? Coincidentally, Steven was the vice president of the new company. I glared at her. Don't talk nonsense. Oh, anyone with eyes can see that he's interested in you. He's always calling you sister this and sister that. Grace laughed and tickled me. He's the vice president of our branch company after all, and the young master of the Lucci Group. He's not worse than that someone. Malia, think about it? I'm going to sleep. I lay down on my back, but Grace was still chattering away. You're going on a business trip with him. You should do something to make the most of this great opportunity, right? I threw a pillow at her and, without waiting for her reaction, turned off the light casually. Go to sleep. I have a flight tomorrow morning. The next day. Not long after I woke up, there was a knock on the door. Steven was standing outside the door, holding soy milk and fried dough sticks in his hand, with a big smile on his face. Sister, I bought you breakfast. Half of his face was hidden under a scarf, and his chestnut bangs covered his forehead, only revealing a pair of big, bright and round eyes. He looked really childish. I stepped aside to let him in. He wasn't the least bit restrained. He casually put the breakfast on the dining table. Is it cold outside? He nodded. His cold hands cupped my face. It's so cold. My hands are frozen stiff. I was stunned. He looked at me pitifully. I turned my eyes away a bit unnaturally. I'll get you a hand warmer. At this time, Grace came out of the bathroom, yawning. When she saw us, she shouted, I didn't see anything. You guys continue, you guys continue. I was speechless. Steven, on the other hand, was laughing happily. The corners of his eyes were raised, and the red mole under his left eye was really beautiful. A part of my heart was slowly crumbling. The cooperation negotiation in Chin City went very smoothly. To celebrate, we went to a private restaurant. I just didn't expect to meet Ronan again. And Olivia, who was smiling brightly beside him. I subconsciously wanted to hide, but Olivia saw me first. Malia, I really didn't expect to meet you here. She took my arm, her tone familiar. I really hated her calling me like that. Olivia was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, ignorant of the hardships of life and had deep-rooted class concepts. She looked down on me, but because of Ronan, she had to be friendly to me. Even now, even though Ronan and I had already broken up, she still maintained that understanding, generous and cheerful appearance. Only then did Olivia seem to notice Stephen beside me and greeted him. "President Little Stephen, you're here too." Although Chin City is big, it's not unusual for people like them at the top of the pyramid to know each other. Olivia turned to Ronan, her voice sweet. "Ronan, since we've met, let's have a meal together, the four of us. Olivia and I haven't seen each other for a long time and have a lot to talk about." Of course Ronan wouldn't refuse her request. All his indulgence and doting were given to Olivia alone. Before I could refuse, Olivia pulled me inside. "Malia, let me tell you, the food in this private restaurant is really delicious. Ronan and I have been here several times." It was as if an invisible big hand was squeezing my heart tightly. I couldn't even say the words to refuse. The air conditioner in the private room was turned up high. Olivia's face was flushed, her eyes lively and extremely good-looking. Ronan took a tissue and wiped the beads of sweat off her face affectionately and naturally, and then asked someone to turn down the air conditioner a bit. Olivia was smiling brightly. He looked at her with a faint smile on his lips and his eyes full of doting. When Ronan looked at me, most of the time it was a sarcastic smile, and the smile never reached his eyes. Suddenly, the food in my mouth became tasteless. I lowered my eyes and stopped looking at them. They were a perfect match, from the same social class, a talented man and a beautiful woman. Everyone said so. Ronan had waited for Olivia for so many years, and they were finally going to get married. At most, I was just a small pebble on their path of love. A small pebble that could be kicked away with one foot. My throat was so tight. Olivia asked me, "Malia, you went abroad after graduating from university, right?" "Yes. Time flies. When I first saw you, you were just a little kid." Olivia and Ronan were childhood sweethearts and grew up together. Later, she went abroad, but they had always kept in touch. When I first met Ronan, he was separated from his beloved one by the ocean. Olivia would come back to China occasionally, but only for a short stay each time. Sometimes I would wonder if Ronan was so cold to me because all his deep affection was given to Olivia, so he could like someone for such a long time. Olivia put a piece of spare rib in Ronan's bowl. She used her own chopsticks. Ronan was a germaphobe and never ate the food others gave him. But this time, he slightly lowered his head, his movements elegant and every gesture was noble. He ate it. Then he looked up at me. Suddenly, I understood that the reason he agreed to have dinner with us wasn't just because it was Olivia's request. It was Ronan's 18th birthday. He had come back to Chin City from university. I rarely had the chance to eat at the same table with the Ronan family. The scene was lively. The relatives and friends of Mr. Ronan and his own relatives and friends were all gathered together. I was extremely happy and put a lot of his favorite dishes in his bowl. But he didn't touch his chopsticks for a long time. He looked at me. "Malia, don't do this again in the future." Only then did I remember his germophobia and habits. I was too excited and eager to prove that I was different that I even forgot to use the serving chopsticks. His voice was unhurried, but all the scrutinizing eyes of everyone were focused on me. There were cold looks, curious looks, and more sarcastic looks. I was so ashamed that I could hardly bear it, but I could only pretend that nothing had happened and force out a bright smile. "Master, I'll get you a new serving." At the moment of turning around, my tears burst out. Ronan did this on purpose this time. He wanted me to give up hope and stay away from his and her life. He was so smart. How could he not know what this gesture meant to me? I thought I had let go, but as long as Ronan appeared in front of me, those self-deceiving thoughts disappeared in an instant. Suddenly, several pieces of fish appeared in my bowl. It was Stephen. He pinched my face affectionately. "Sister has lost a lot of weight after coming to Chin City with me." He saw my embarrassment. I smiled at him and put the fish in my mouth. Olivia teased, "Malia, President Little Stephen is your boyfriend, right?" I subconsciously wanted to deny it, but he held my hand. "Yes." His voice was firm and full of strength. Ronan's eyes fell on our clasped hands. I don't know if it was my illusion, but his face seemed to darken a bit. Olivia took his arm. Malia, you must come to my birthday party, okay? I'll announce a good news then. Her smile was extremely sweet. Are they finally going to get married? Can President Little Stephen also do us the honor of coming? Stephen looked at me, being cute. I'll do whatever sister says. When he was in the company, he always had a sense of maturity that didn't match his age. But with me, it was really different. Only then did I think that what Grace said was somewhat believable. President Little Stephen really dotes on his girlfriend. Olivia leaned on Ronan's shoulder. Malia, when we had a party last time, Callan mentioned you. Everyone misses you. I remember you even confessed to Callan back then, right? She frowned, as if trying to recall. Ah, was it when you were in university? Callan was Ronan's childhood friend. My throat tightened. I didn't. Oh, Malia, you're still so shy even though you're so grown up. Callan already has his own family. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Every frown and smile of hers was just right. She looked as if she was really just a caring big sister next door who cared about me, only I knew the implications behind her words. Her words were like knives, stabbing holes one after another in my heart. Olivia, stop talking. The smile on her face froze, but deep in her eyes was nothing but complacency. She had achieved her purpose. A sudden surge of anger rose in my heart, and I simply decided to go all out. We both know what happened that day. If you want to disgust me, you might as well make it clear. Malia, I didn't mean that. Her expression was very helpless, as if she didn't know what she had done wrong. She was still acting. But everyone was willing to be her audience. I didn't care about the expressions of the people present. I picked up my bag and got up to leave. Stephen grabbed me and stood beside me, forcefully pulling me into his arms. Miss Olivia, no matter what grudges you had before, now she is my fiancée. Please don't mention things she doesn't want to hear. His gaze seemed to sweep over Ronan unintentionally. Also, she doesn't want to see you again. Please don't show up in front of her in the future. His voice was firm and powerful. Olivia's face turned pale. She was used to being the center of attention and no one had ever dared to talk to her like that. The pent-up resentment of so many years was suddenly released. I felt much better. Stephen held me and walked outside. I was lost in my own thoughts and only said thank you to him after a while. Sister, you don't need to thank me. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes pure with a hint of laughter in his tone. If you really want to thank me, well, how about promising yourself to me? I leaned against the car window, looking surprised. The light in his eyes almost burned me. But I had no intention of starting a new relationship yet. He cupped my face. Sister, you don't need to give me an answer so quickly. You can think about it and then answer me. I'm not in a hurry. I only asked one question, why me? He said with certainty, because you're worth it, sister. I like you very much. I liked you from the first moment I saw you. Do you believe in love at first sight? He looked at me fixedly, his eyes curved, a smile on his lips. I fell in love with you at first sight. My heart was in a mess. I opened my mouth several times but couldn't say anything. As soon as I closed my eyes, the past events flashed before me like a revolving lantern. After Ronan went to university, no one would protect me like he did. And since his 18th birthday, I never called him brother again. Ronan always looked at me helplessly. Several times he wanted to say something but only moved his lips without making a sound. He was such a proud person that he would never bow his head for anyone. My junior high school days were terrible. To stay away from those people, I chose an ordinary high school with strict rules where we had a vacation only once every 3 months. I cut off contact with the outside world and studied hard. I had a strong determination in my heart, hoping to bridge the gap between Ronan and me in this way. After graduating, Ronan didn't enter the family business immediately but chose a multinational company and started from the bottom. After learning the news, I deliberately went to the city where Ronan was to attend university. I hadn't contacted him for a long time. I often stared blankly at those numbers that I knew by heart but didn't have the courage to dial. I once asked my mother about his whereabouts. She only warned me that Ronan was busy and told me not to disturb him. At that time, my mother had already left the Ronan family, and I didn't even have a legitimate reason to go to Ronan openly. One day, after drinking some wine, urged by my roommate Grace, I dialed that number. "Hello?" His voice was still nice, more mature and deeper than I remembered. "Ronan, it's me." There was a long silence on the other side. I couldn't bear it and took another look at the phone screen. It wasn't hung up. "Malia?" "Yes, it's me." I took a deep breath. "I miss you." The saying that wine gives courage to the coward is really true. But there came a cold and emotionless laugh from the other side. "Do you know what you're saying?" His voice was terribly cold, completely different from before. I was stunned. Grace, however, kept winking at me. I summoned up my courage again. "I know, Ronan. I've liked you for many years. Malia, what you say makes me feel sick." At that moment, I felt that all the blood in my body had frozen. My hand holding the phone was shaking uncontrollably. The Ronan I knew would never say such things to me. Even at his 18th birthday party when he rejected me, his tone was gentle. "Don't call me again in the future. Don't make me think that you and Helen are the same kind of people." Helen was my mother. My mother had taken care of Ronan as he grew up and had long regarded him as her own child. And he had always respected her and would never call her by her name like that. The reason why my mother left the Ronan family was not at all what she said, that she was unable to cope. What on earth had happened? During the days when I was studying, what on earth had happened? There was a beeping sound from the phone, and my eyes were blurred with tears. I urgently needed an answer. But fate was so ridiculous. My mother died. Because of a damn car accident. My world collapsed. I didn't even have the strength to pursue the answer. When I saw Ronan again, it was 2 years later. He was invited to participate in the business simulation competition at school and served as a judge. I was the third-place winner of that session. Ronan attracted many people's attention as soon as he appeared. He was more mature, with well-defined features and a calm temperament. "God, who is that? So handsome!" I heard exclamations one after another, rising and falling continuously. The innocent and gentle boy in my memory had finally gone away. I watched him silently, my eyes greedy. Finally, it was the award ceremony. I stood on the podium. Ronan seemed to pause when he saw me, but soon he looked away. For him, I had long been an unimportant stranger. He walked up to me and put the medal on me. His smile was distant and official, leaving no extra emotions for me. My nose was so sour that tears flowed down uncontrollably. Ronan's breathing hitched. But soon he walked away, leaving me only a resolute back. After that competition, it was another winter. Mr. Ronan invited me to spend the new year at the Ronan family. He had been very kind to me. Since my mother died, it was he who had been sponsoring my education. I couldn't refuse his request. I was extremely nervous and even rehearsed in advance the expressions and actions I should make when seeing Ronan. But after returning to the Ronan family, I learned that while Ronan hated my mother, he also hated Mr. Ronan. He hadn't come back for several years. From an old servant's mouth, I learned the whole story. It was said that my mother had intervened in the marriage of the Ronan family couple, causing Mr. Ronan to file for divorce from Mrs. Ronan. Mrs. Ronan was a sensitive person. How could she bear such a shock? One late night, she took sleeping pills and committed suicide. Ronan believed it. But I didn't. I didn't believe it at all. I had wanted to ask Mr. Ronan so many times what had happened. Were they all telling the truth? But when I saw his extremely aged face, the words were on the tip of my tongue but I couldn't say them out. I could only play my role well, taking good care of him and trying to make him happy. Sometimes I was a bit dazed, as if I was doing what Ronan should have done. Soon I wiped those unrealistic thoughts from my mind. Whether it was a misunderstanding or the truth, there was no possibility between Ronan and me long ago. He wouldn't like me. On the day before New Year's Eve, Ronan came back. He frowned as if he hadn't expected that it was me who opened the door. His hair was covered with snow and wind, his skin was whiter than the moonlight, and his eyes were colder than ice and snow. For a moment, I didn't know how to react and could only stand there blankly. The cold wind blew in, and I couldn't help shivering. Ronan walked in and closed the door. Anwu came up to him, her tone both surprised and happy. The young master is back. Sir. The young master is back. Ronan took off his coat, and his scrutinizing gaze fell on me. I twisted my hands uneasily and explained, it was Mr. Ronan who asked me to come. He snorted coldly and strode past me. As if he didn't care about what I said at all. Ronan seldom showed up at the dining table. I didn't know whether it was because of me or Mr. Ronan. But I still went to call him for every meal. It was the 4th day of the Chinese New Year. As usual, I went upstairs to call him for dinner. His door was ajar, and there were giggles coming from the room. My hand that was about to knock on the door stopped. Olivia was sitting on his lap. They got closer and closer and finally kissed. From my angle, I could see Olivia's slender back. I covered my mouth and fled in a hurry. A quarter of an hour later, Ronan walked down holding Olivia's hand. Her lipstick was smudged, her clothes were wrinkled, but her smile was shy and timid. I knew very clearly what had happened. I lowered my head and mechanically swallowed the rice, trying to block out their chatting and laughing. Ronan had always been reserved in dealing with relationships. Before that day, I had thought that they were just ordinary friends. Later, Olivia came more and more frequently. She became the mediator between Ronan and Mr. Ronan. And I was just an outsider. After the new year, I left the Ronan family. On my birthday, I received a text message. I had thought that it was a sign that my relationship with Ronan had eased. Happy birthday. This unsigned message came from the number that I knew by heart. Another text message followed closely. Come out and meet me. 223 Zhaoheng Street. I was so excited that I didn't even have time to think about why Ronan would set the meeting place in a bar. Suddenly, a ray of light shone into my dull world. I carefully put on makeup and almost ran after getting out of the taxi. My palms were sweating little by little. Malia. I turned around, but it wasn't him. Callan approached and grabbed my wrist. Ronan will be here soon. Let's play for a while. He was Ronan's childhood friend. I had met him several times. When will he come? Callan grinned. Oh, why are you always thinking about Ronan? We haven't seen each other for a long time. You used to always call me Callan brother. Now I don't even deserve a title. Thinking of those old days, my guard gradually disappeared. But I underestimated the horror of people's hearts. In the eyes of those young masters, I was Ronan's pet. If he didn't want me anymore, they could take me over immediately. Malia, Ronan will be here soon. Let's have a drink first. I was so nervous that under such persuasion, I drank one glass after another of the strong liquor that I thought was a beverage. In a daze, someone approached. Malia, Malia. The voice was affectionate and gentle, exactly the same as in my memory. I was almost on the verge of crying. Brother Ronan. He kissed away the teardrops on my face. Just as he was about to make the next move, the door was kicked open forcefully. I was startled, and my mind barely cleared up. He wasn't Ronan. Ronan was standing by the door, his face looking horribly gloomy. Get out. Callan was so scared that he rolled onto the floor, looking extremely ugly. Ronan, she seduced me. She said she liked me, and the people in the bar can testify. Don't make me say it again. Callan didn't even have time to get dressed before running out. I was holding a quilt, not knowing what to do. Ronan's gaze was like ice, almost freezing me. Malia, if you want to be a phoenix, you might as well find a better tree. After several years, this was the first sentence he said to me on his own initiative. I shook my head vigorously. It's not like that, it's not like that. But my explanation seemed so feeble. Ronan turned around and left. I jumped out of bed, not even having time to get dressed, just wanting him to look back at me, just look at me again. Brother, please listen to my explanation. I tripped over the blanket and fell to the ground. Ronan looked back, his eyes darkening. He slammed the door shut and crouched in front of me. Malia, what? So soon you've changed to a bigger tree? He pinched my chin so hard that he almost crushed my bones. My eyes were filled with tears. His face became blurry. Ronan picked me up horizontally and threw me onto the bed without any mercy. Malia, as you wish. His slender fingers were on the buttons of his clothes, moving slowly, but his eyes were extremely fierce. He like this scared me. I closed my eyes and clenched the sheets tightly. But Ronan's movements didn't slow down, sister. Stephen pushed me awake, and I realized that I was already crying my eyes out. He handed me a tissue. Did you have a nightmare? I nodded and pushed up the window shade. Outside the plane, the sky was incredibly blue. 3 years ago, when I flew to the other side of the ocean, the sky was just as blue. There are still half an hour before we arrive in Rouen City. Do you want to rest a bit more? I shook my head and remained silent. He sent me downstairs, leaned against the car, and smiled brightly. Sister, have an early rest today. See you tomorrow. Suddenly, the scenes in those memories seemed a bit farther away from me. I smiled at him. After going upstairs, I saw Ronan again at my doorstep. Was he here to seek justice for Olivia? I was annoyed in my heart and even felt that he was like a piece of chewing gum that stuck to you. Ronan was slightly lowering his head, his expression gloomy and unclear. There was smoke all around and I coughed, and he frowned and threw away the cigarette. But, what are you doing here? He didn't answer me. He looked out of the window and asked, do you really like Stephen? I looked him straight in the eyes. Yes, I'm being obedient to you, right? I found a good big tree. His eyes darkened. Ronan, you should be very clear about what happened that day. I know. Yes, he knew. He knew that those text messages were sent by Olivia, but he still thought it was my fault, that I was vain and would stop at nothing. How could he be willing to make things difficult for the moonlight in his heart for an insignificant person? But unexpectedly, this time, I was surprisingly calm. What do you know? I said in a mocking tone. Ronan, you're really a despicable person. I don't like you anymore. Don't worry. From now on I won't disturb your life. You really annoy me. So please don't show up in front of me again either. Ronan walked up to me, ignoring my guarded expression. Is this what you really mean? Yes. His eyebrows drooped slightly, hiding the strange look in his eyes. You'd better remember clearly, Malia. This time it's you who let go first. After saying that, he walked away quickly. What kind of trick was Ronan playing again? Scum! I told Grace about what had happened these days. She spat in disgust. This bastard is just like having the cake and eating it too. He's clearly about to marry Olivia, but he still wants to tease you and make you restless. Grace spat hard and warned, Malia, don't fall for it. I nodded, deeply agreeing. Stephen was showing up in front of me more and more frequently. I suspect he doesn't even have a job. For example, right now, as soon as it was off work time, he rushed over, completely ignoring the looks of others. Sister, come and have dinner with me. He paused and then added, you promised me last time. Last time, he helped me out of a difficult situation in my former company, and I promised to treat him to a meal. I pointed at the computer. I haven't finished this yet. I'll help you. He didn't even give me a chance to refuse. He bent down and put his hand on mine, moving the mouse with my hand. I didn't break free. His fresh and pleasant scent surrounded me. It smelled really good. I couldn't help but shift my gaze to his face. His skin was very good. He had a pretty baby face and looked several years younger than his actual age. Sister, have you fallen in love with me? He leaned close to my ear, his voice low. The temperature on my face gradually rose. I opened my mouth but hadn't figured out how to answer. The corners of his eyes lifted, and then he broke into a smile. I like sister too. He stretched out his index finger and scratched the back of my hand, and then put both hands on the keyboard to type. Pretending that nothing had happened, he stared at the computer screen, looking serious and focused. The area where he had scratched was much warmer than other parts. I'm going to the bathroom. I almost fled in a hurry. His low, amused laugh came from behind. Such behavior was really embarrassing. Obviously, I'm several years older than him. If Grace saw this, she would surely mock me severely. I quickly tidied myself up in front of the mirror before walking out of the bathroom. Stephen had already finished the work at hand. When he saw me coming, as if asking for praise, he leaned his head against my chin, blinked his eyes, and said, Sister, am I good? I had seen him in the company. Although he was young, in terms of handling things, he already had some similarities with his father. Some people secretly called him a smiling tiger. It didn't mean he was insidious. It was just that he seemed kind on the surface but was extremely strict about work and often criticized the senior employees in the company without sparing any effort, completely ignoring their faces. But at this moment, this little tiger had bright eyes, wagging his tail as if asking for my praise. My heart was completely softened and in a mess. Really good. I looked away and stopped looking into his eyes. He pouted, dissatisfied. Sister is so perfunctory. I was a bit helpless. Unable to resist, I raised my hand and touched his head. It was furry and felt really nice. He nuzzled into my palm and then took my hand and went to the parking lot. After getting in the car, he held my hand again. From beginning to end, I didn't break free. Sister's hands are so soft, he scratched my palm. I want to hold them all the time. This time, I didn't lower my head to muddle through. Instead, I looked him straight in the eyes and placed our clasped hands between our meeting gazes. Brother's hands are nice too. They match mine well. He looked at me motionlessly, brought my hand to his chest, and without saying a word, kissed me. This kiss was clean and gentle. I even thought there was a taste of lychee in his mouth. I don't know how long it was before he let me go. His eyes were glistening with water, and he was breathing slightly. He said softly, "We can't continue." "What's wrong?" His face was flushed. I couldn't resist reaching out and pinching it. He held my hand, looking a bit shy. "Sister, I'm afraid I can't resist." He looked really cute now. "Sister, I like you." Only then did he take out the other hand that was behind his back and handed the small gift box in his palm to me. "Sister, let's give it a try." Inside the box was a silver bracelet. There were two little figures hanging on the bracelet. One was him and the other was me. I heard myself say, "Okay, let's give it a try." Stephen was really clingy. In the morning, he would personally bring breakfast, pick me up and send me off to work, have lunch with me, and hold my hand to wander around everywhere. He didn't have any awareness of an office romance at all. Grace said he was my exclusive pendant. When Stephen heard this, he slightly bent over, rested his head on my shoulder, looking very proud. "I am sister's pendant. There's only one like me, no duplicates." Grace teased me and said, "Help." I smiled and shrugged my shoulders. "To Stephen," I said, "you're so heavy." He hugged me even tighter. Grace rolled her eyes. "Fine, I'll go. I shouldn't have come here to eat dog food on my own." She left, and only Stephen and I were left in the house. He whined and wanted to kiss me. I pushed him away. "I just put on my makeup. If we don't leave soon, we'll be late for work." "Shall we not go to work today?" "Stephen," I glanced at him, emphasizing my tone, "we agreed that work and personal life should be separated." I poked his shoulder with my fingertip. "No intimate contact in the company, and no convenience arranged for me at work." He pouted. "Then it'll be okay if we're not in the same company, right? Then I can have lunch with you, and I can also kiss and hug you." I frowned. "What do you want to do?" He took my hand, passed it over the gray sweater, and placed it on his waist. With such an action, his expression was as cute as could be. "Sister, move out and live with me." I had to admit that the feel of his body under my hand was really good. He looked young, but his muscles were real. I tried to break free, but couldn't get my hand out of his palm. "Actually, I'm not on the way at all. Every morning I have to get up 30 minutes early, choose the clothes to wear, style my hair, buy breakfast, and then pretend to be leisurely when I appear in front of you, telling you that everything is just right." He looked a bit aggrieved, but it was all on purpose. I originally wanted sister to accept my love without any burden, but now, I regret it. He looked at me, his deer-like eyes blinking. "I want sister to tell me she likes me in her own way." "I like you. Not this kind." He frowned, sounding a bit dissatisfied. "Why does sister always avoid me in front of others? It makes me feel so insecure." I opened my mouth to explain, but he suddenly got up without warning. "I see. Actually, you still don't like me enough." "It's not like that." He didn't listen to my explanation. Instead, he said in a vengeful tone, "Let's go, sister. If we don't leave soon, we'll be late." On the elevator, he didn't say another word. I was also feeling a bit angry in my heart. After getting into the car, he didn't start the vehicle for a long time. Instead, he turned his head to look at me and said, "Sister, why don't you try to coax me?" I really had no experience in coaxing people. Before I met Grace, I was used to being alone, eating, studying, walking, and seeing a doctor all by myself. I'm easy to coax, as long as... I leaned over and blocked his chattering lips. After a while, I asked, "Are you not angry anymore?" He nodded and then shook his head. "I need one more time to be completely not angry." I ignored his shameless words and said seriously, "Since you're not angry anymore, let's talk about this matter." He sat up straight and put his hands on the steering wheel. "All those things you said just now were to force me to give in and make me live with you. Right?" His little trick was exposed, and he gave me a flattering smile. "I didn't mean it. You can't do this again next time. Besides, I'm also angry. You shouldn't have made such a hasty decision." He said he knew he was wrong but still pestered me for kisses and hugs. I really couldn't out-argue him. By the time he let go of me, it was already past the time to clock in for work. Don't be a rascal when we're talking about serious matters. Even though I said that, it seemed that no rules would work when it came to dealing with him. The result after this incident was that I moved to his place. And he went to work for another company. In his words, office romances are not exciting at all. Moreover, he also put part of the blame on me. As long as I'm in the same place as sister, I can't help but want to see what you're doing. I'm supposed to be a career elite. How can I be bothered by love affairs? I rolled my eyes. "Sister, give me a kiss." What a brat who says one thing but means another. I hadn't thought of Ronan for a long time. The next time I thought of him was when Mr. Ronan called me. Mr. Ronan didn't have much time left and wanted to see me. Since Mrs. Ronan passed away, his health had deteriorated a lot, and he had become even more taciturn. I knew he was feeling guilty. But I didn't know what role my mother had played in this. If I didn't ask this time, I would never know the truth. After getting the news, I hurried to the Ronan family. It was snowing heavily that day. The snow had covered my shoes. When the door opened, it wasn't Aunt Wu. The man frowned slightly. His tall figure loomed over me. It seemed that our positions had been reversed. I walked past him without looking sideways. Aunt Wu came up to meet me. "Miss Malia, you're finally here. Mr. Ronan has been waiting for you for a long time." I patted the snow off my shoulders and went upstairs. There were doctors, his relatives, and friends in the room. Mr. Ronan was lying on the bed, surrounded by medical equipment. When he saw me coming, he motioned for me to come closer. "Father Ronan." His face was extremely aged, but his eyes were full of loving kindness. I had grown up under his watch. Mr. Ronan had something to say to me, so he asked the others to leave. And Ronan came to my side without my noticing. "Good girl, you've been wronged." He reached out as if he wanted to touch me. I moved closer. "Helen is innocent." From his fragmented words, I got a full picture of the whole thing. Mr. Ronan didn't love Mrs. Ronan. Their business marriage came to an end when I was in high school. He just didn't expect it would cause Mrs. Ronan's death. And my mother? She was just a woman who was overly kind-hearted. When rumors were flying everywhere, she didn't argue at all, just to let Ronan shift some of his hatred for Mr. Ronan. Ronan obviously found it even harder to accept this truth. I saw his hands trembling slightly. But his face remained expressionless. That night, Mr. Ronan passed away. He said what he wanted to say and left without any hesitation. The villa was in a desolate state, with cries echoing everywhere. Ronan didn't cry, but there was a hint of gloom between his brows. We were busy handling Mr. Ronan's funeral affairs, but we were like two familiar strangers. Everything went back to normal. Just on some nights, I couldn't help but wonder, what made Ronan believe such a clumsy lie? Later, I figured it out. He had transformed all his guilt towards his mother into hatred for others. Even someone as rational and sensible as he was couldn't avoid being like this. On many nights after Mrs. Ronan's death, Ronan might have also questioned himself like Mr. Ronan did. Why hadn't he been by his mother's side? I smiled bitterly, feeling sour and astringent in my heart, and more of anger. In Ronan's eyes, my mother and I were just an excuse for him to vent and relieve his guilt. At the funeral parlor, Olivia rushed over. Her makeup was exquisite but couldn't hide her tired face. I was a bit surprised. Only then did I remember that she hadn't shown up when Mr. Ronan was on his deathbed. There might have been some cracks in her relationship with Ronan. On my way to the bathroom, I heard the conversation between Ronan and Olivia. Ronan, you can't leave me like this. You can't just discard me after using me. I really like you. Olivia's voice was choked with sobs. Ronan's tone was extremely cold. I won't pursue what you've done before. But if you keep pestering me, you know what I'll do. Ronan. They might have said something else, but I didn't listen anymore. These things had nothing to do with me. After Mr. Ronan was buried, I started packing my things to leave. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. After snowing for half a month, there was finally a sunny day. Ronan came to stand behind me without my noticing and said, "Let me give you a ride." I refused. This time, he didn't force me. He just gave me a deep look, as if he had a lot to say but ended up saying nothing. It was just like the days after his 18th birthday. After learning the truth, I realized that the truth was actually not that important to me anymore. Those people from back then had already passed away. Ronan and I were from two different worlds. I had peeked into a corner of his world, been attracted by the prosperous scene inside, and tried my best to integrate into it, but only ended up getting hurt badly time and again. I should have recognized this long ago. Fortunately, it wasn't too late. I opened the door. Stephen was standing outside, smiling brightly at me. "Sister, I've come to take you home." He ran over, not caring about the looks of others at all, and hugged me tightly into his arms. "Sister, I missed you so much." He buried his face in my neck, his voice muffled, and even mischievously kissed my collarbone. I hit him, and he then let go of me, holding my hand and complaining. Is the Ronan family that poor? They're not even willing to turn on the air conditioner. As he said that, he put my hand into his clothes. His abdomen was burning hot. I frowned, not approving of his behavior. It made me seem rather improper. He didn't care and said with a grin, "It's the warmest here." He then took off the scarf around his neck and wrapped it around mine instead. His movements were gentle and meticulous, but he still complained, "This sun might as well not be there. It's still cold where it should be cold." Before leaving, I took one last look at the villa of the Ronan family. The villa still looked the same as it did when I was 5 years old, not changing a bit. Ronan was standing at the entrance. The sun was shining on his face, but I couldn't make out his expression. Stephen beside me said sarcastically, "Old man." He was really jealous. I pinched his arm and said, "Let's go." Only then did he put his arm around me and walked out. After getting home, I sent the inheritance gift agreement back to the Ronan family. Mr. Ronan had left me a sum of money, enough for me to live the rest of my life. He might have done it out of guilt, to make up for the grievances and criticisms I had suffered over the years. But I didn't want it. I didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. Ronan called me several times. I didn't answer and then added him to the blacklist. Grace was drinking coffee and glanced at my phone. "Ronan again?" I nodded and continued to work on the project proposal. She gave me a thumbs up. "The puppy love is so much better. Alas, I also want a President Little Stephen." I smiled, and the always empty place in my heart seemed to be filled, but Ronan didn't give up. We met again at the engagement party of Stephen's cousin. I was standing beside Stephen, and Ronan was at another table, looking at me without blinking. When he saw me looking over, his furrowed brows and eyes finally relaxed. His gaze was too eager and blatant, which made me a bit horrified. I quickly looked away. Stephen also noticed something was wrong and whispered in my ear, "I'll ask my cousin to take you to the second floor to rest later." When we went up to the second floor, my cousin met an acquaintance and was chatting happily. I was looking for a room by myself. In the corridor, a door opened quietly, and a hand pulled me into the dark. I struggled. There was a faint smell of alcohol all around. It's me. Ronan? When did he come up to the second floor too? You blocked me? His voice was terribly hoarse. I pursed my lips and remained silent. Malia. He hadn't called me like that for a long time. Seeing that I was stunned in place, he called again, Malia. Malia, I'm sorry. I opened my eyes wide in surprise. He held my hand and said again, I'm sorry. Was he apologizing to me? Ronan, do you think what you're saying now is important to me? You're just causing me more trouble like this. I slowly pried his fingers away one by one. We have nothing to do with each other anymore. Please behave yourself. He interrupted me. It's important to me. Ronan, don't try to relieve your guilt through me anymore. My mother endured the cold remarks and his hatred until her death. Only when the truth was inevitably presented before him did he think of seeking my forgiveness. The person who once seemed to shine with his own light in my eyes had long lost his luster by this moment. His eyes were red. I had seen him in many states, eating, sleeping, reading, being angry, being happy, but never in this state. In my eyes, and in everyone's eyes, he was calm, composed, and had great self-control. He would never show weakness in front of others. But what did it have to do with me? Grace was right. A belated affection is even cheaper than grass. Besides, your behavior like this already counts as sexual harassment. The renowned President Ronan wouldn't want to make the front page headlines in this way, would he? He looked at me, his gaze even greedy. Why not? I felt a bit nauseous. At this moment, what was the difference between him and Tom? President Ronan, please behave yourself. I tried to slip out from under his arm, but he grabbed the back of my neck. Ronan. I emphasized my tone, feeling both scared and angry in my heart. What on earth did he want to do? His eyes were a bit glazed, and he kept calling my name, Malia, Malia. Disgusting. I bit him hard. He winced in pain but didn't let go of me. Even when there was a taste of blood in my mouth, he still maintained the original posture. He leaned closer to me, with tenderness gathering in his eyes. Malia, there was nothing between Olivia and me. How many times do I have to say it? I don't give a damn. I took a deep breath and exploded. You can be with whoever you want. It has nothing to do with me. Malia, keep your voice down. It's not like you. I was so angry that I laughed. Without saying another word, I gave him a hard kick. I quickly ran away, not even looking back to see how he was. After running back to the room, I was still shaken. I couldn't figure out how Ronan could have become like that. He made me feel strange and terrifying. There was a knock on the door. Sister. It was Stephen. What happened? Why is your face so pale? I didn't say anything. He quickly guessed. Was it Ronan? I'm okay. After saying that, I walked up and hugged him. Hearing his steady and powerful heartbeat, I felt a bit more at ease. Do you want to go back? I shook my head. I've already promised my cousin that I'll stay here for the night. He lowered his head and pecked me on the face. As you say, sister. I'll stay with you until you leave. I won't give that old man any chance. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly and subconsciously leaned to one side, wanting to hide in the arms of the person beside me. But Stephen wasn't in the bed. I felt a bit panicked for no reason. I put on my coat and left the room. There was a lot of noise outside, coming from the end of the corridor. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. What was going on so late at night? I had a bad feeling, so I quickened my pace. Sure enough, Stephen was wrestling with someone. He was on top of the person cursing, "Are you starved for love? What are you doing eyeing someone else's wife?" As he said that, he gave the person another hard punch. There were people all around, but no one dared to step forward to pull them apart. Stephen. Hearing my voice, he looked up. His cheeks were bruised and purple, and there was some blood at the corner of his mouth. He didn't look good. His eyes lit up and his voice was cheerful as if he wanted to take credit. Sister, I frowned. Get up. Ronan, who was under him, was also looking at me, his gaze deep. His whole face looked even worse than Stephen's. Seeing that I wasn't happy, Stephen looked a bit helpless. Sister, Malia. Ronan called me, but I pretended not to hear and walked forward to pull Stephen up. I stood on tiptoe, straightened the hair on his forehead, and then took his hand. Let's go. Get some medicine and then go home. His eyes lit up and he nodded vigorously, reaching out to wrap his arms around my waist. He held his head high, like a rooster that had won a fight. I pursed my lips to suppress the laughter that was almost bursting out. I'd settle accounts with him properly when we got back to the room. Ronan blocked our way. Malia. Stephen's face darkened. To hell with you. So childish. Ronan ignored him and just looked at me, saying, I'm injured too. I found it funny. Stephen flared up. If you're injured, go back to your fiancé. What are you talking to my wife about? The term wife made my face a bit hot. I pinched the back of his hand to calm him down. Stop being so quick-tongued. Let's go and deal with the wounds. But he didn't stop. In full view of everyone, he held my face and kissed me hard. I pinched the soft flesh on his waist. He laughed like a cat that had successfully stolen fish and glanced at Ronan from time to time with a look of pure smugness on his face. I didn't look at Ronan and led Stephen away. Once we entered the room, his kisses came pouring down on me. I melted in his arms. He leaned close to my ear, his breath warm. Sister, is it okay? It was funny to say that we had been living together for several months, but he had never touched me. My memories of such things weren't really that good. Stephen noticed something was off and knew I wasn't willing, so he had never forced me. He always knew when to stop. I hooked my arms around his neck. Sister, this means you've agreed. When I woke up, it was already past 10 o'clock. Stephen had been holding me in his arms. When I looked up, I could see his clearly defined chin. I couldn't resist kissing it. He woke up and kissed me back, mumbling, why don't you sleep a bit more? I can't sleep anymore. His skin was nice. He was delicate and good-looking everywhere. It was obvious at a glance that he was a pampered young master. He held my mischievous hand, his eyes bright. Shall we continue what we didn't finish yesterday? My face turned red. I hit him with my other hand. Stop it. He kissed my fingers. I really want to take sister with me everywhere. His love talk was really something. This was the first time I had been blatantly favored by someone. Sister, come home with me. Stephen held my hand and acted coquettishly. He had already grasped my weakness. Whenever he looked at me with those overly clean eyes, I always complied with his requests. But not this time. I wasn't ready yet. If it hadn't been for Mr. Liu and Mrs. Liu staying abroad due to an emergency last time, I wouldn't have agreed to accompany Stephen to his cousin's engagement banquet. Seeing that I was firm in my attitude, he simply sat down again. Then I won't go either. I'll stay with you for the Dragon Boat Festival. No way. Mrs. Liu has called 3 times already. Sister, I promise you that they'll like you. Come home with me. I shook my head. He got angry and bit my shoulder. I was both in pain and shocked. I shouted, Stephen, are you a dog? Seeing the tears in my eyes, he kissed my face to please me. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Who's that? Grace, I think. She said she'd come to play with me when she was free these days. As I said that, I walked over to open the door. The situation was very different from what I had imagined. Stephen stood behind me, his voice loud. Dad, Mom, what are you doing here? Looking at the 2 middle-aged people at the door who had an outstanding temperament, were well-maintained and didn't look like middle-aged people at all, my mind stopped working. I didn't know if they had heard the words I had just scolded Stephen. Wasn't I scolding them indirectly? Stephen poked me in the back. Nervously, the words, Dad, and Mom, slipped out of my mouth. The man behind me laughed heartily. I was so embarrassed that I just wanted to bury my head in the sand. Stephen took out disposable slippers from the shoe cabinet. Mom, Dad, change your shoes. I'm too lazy to clean up. Mrs. Liu raised her eyebrows in surprise. Can you cook then? Stephen put his arm around my waist. A little, but my wife cooks better. I poked him with my elbow to signal him not to talk nonsense. He just grinned and hugged me even tighter. Mrs. Lu muttered as she changed her shoes, "I've urged you so many times to come back, but you wouldn't. You had to make us come to you." As she said that, she hit Mr. Lu beside her. "You should have controlled your son." Mrs. Lu was very different from what I had imagined. I ran to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of tea for them. "Uncle and Aunt, please have some tea." Mrs. Lu took out a huge red envelope from her bag. Uncle and Aunt sound so formal. Just call them the same way as Ranran does. "This is a meeting gift for my daughter-in-law." I was a bit at a loss. Stephen directly took the red envelope into his own hands and weighed it. "Mom, you weren't even this generous when you gave me lucky money before." Mrs. Lu glared at him angrily. "What are you taking it for?" "It's for my daughter-in-law." He said seriously, "This is the joint property of our husband and wife." Mrs. Lu poked Mr. Lu beside her and said, "Where's your meeting gift?" Mr. Lu was much more low-key. There was only a thin card in the red envelope, but it seemed, the amount must be quite large. "Thank you, Dad." Mr. Lu was concise. "Well, it's the fee for changing your way of addressing." This was too fast. Stephen rolled up his sleeves and said confidently, "Dad, Mom, you just sit there and watch me show off my skills." I was about to get up, but he pushed me down and stared at my stomach. "Honey, you just sit and rest." Mrs. Lu's eyes immediately lit up. "How many months pregnant is the baby? Do you have the ultrasound pictures?" Stephen was setting me up again. "Mom, not yet." After the first mom was called out, the second and third ones came out much more smoothly. Mrs. Lu looked at the tooth mark on my shoulder and smiled ambiguously. "Keep it up. Then I'll prepare more things for the baby recently." My face blushed excessively. There was a scream from the kitchen, "Sister, help me." It was a complete mess. He stood in the center of the chaos, looking helpless with wisps of black smoke rising from the pot. In the end, we went out to eat. Stephen was still brooding over this failure and would always want to show off his skills whenever he got the chance. I was so pestered by him that I could only stay in the kitchen to watch over him. But things developed in a strange direction. "Sister, right here. The location is great." I knocked his hand away, feeling both shy and angry. "Stephen, what on earth are you thinking about in your head?" He rubbed his head against me. "It's all about sister." His hand slid to my back. I couldn't do anything about him. "So this is how it feels to be loved by someone." Our wedding was set on September 9th. Stephen was in a suit and hugged me from behind. "Sister, you look so beautiful today." "You don't look bad either." He was about to kiss me but was slapped away by me. "My makeup will get smeared." He pouted and rested his head on my shoulder, gently stroking my belly with both hands. "Sister, let's name her Jojo." "Okay." He then rubbed contentedly in the hollow of my neck. At this time, someone came to deliver something. The outer packaging was layered and very tight. I carefully opened it and inside was a crystal ball. Inside the crystal ball, everything was coming back to life and full of spring. A little girl in a red dress was standing in front of the villa, smiling brightly, but there was clearly nothing in front of her. The little girl's eyes and eyebrows were carved extremely finely, with a cute and lively expression. It was the scene of my first meeting with Ronan. This despicable old man. Stephen gritted his teeth, his brows furrowed tightly. He's actually playing the memory card. I pinched his wrist. "If you don't like it, send it back." "No, there's you and the crystal ball. So childish." It was clearly he who sent out the invitations. Ronan didn't come in person, but he was already this angry just because the gift arrived. If he had come in person, wouldn't he have caused a huge uproar? No, he would deliberately hold my hand and stroll in front of Ronan to assert his ownership. I pursed my lips and smiled. He added, "Put it in the basement." "Okay, put it in the basement." He pinched my waist and his breath sprayed all over my ears. "Sister, don't think about him. The wedding is about to start. Don't make a fuss." His voice was low. "Now, the groom may kiss the bride. How can one officiate one's own wedding?" Stephen. My lipstick is smeared. You'll pay for it. I'll pay. Isn't it enough that I give myself to you? From now on, the groom belongs to the bride. Stephen's side story: the first time I saw her was in a sketching class. She was the model for that class. I was late. As soon as I entered the classroom, I saw her right in the center. There weren't many Asian faces in the school, so I couldn't help but take a few more glances. The soft sunlight fell on her face. She was indeed a good model, motionless, slightly lowering her head, with calm eyes and eyebrows. Not knowing what she was thinking, she didn't notice me. The hustle and bustle of the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with her. The boys sitting in front of me were communicating in Russian, using vulgar words. I kicked the leg of their chair and replied in Russian, "Show some respect." She was finally attracted by our commotion and looked up, giving us a faint glance. Do you know what love at first sight is? That's what I felt for her. I didn't see her again for a long time. The last time I saw her abroad was in a restaurant on Charlie Street. She was a waitress there, with a cold face and a hint of melancholy always in her eyes and eyebrows. It was only much later that I realized that I had always wanted to smooth out that hint of melancholy, and later this impulse unconsciously turned into a deeper emotion. The drunken man behaved vulgarly and reached out to hug her. I couldn't stand it and was just about to help her, but she nimbly tripped the man and looked down at him, saying, "Screw you." Full of momentum. Then she took off her apron and walked outside. It was snowing heavily outside. She stood under the street lamp, and a flash of light illuminated her face full of tear stains. I chased after her, but she was already gone. I never saw her again until I returned to the country. It's hard for me to describe how I felt at that moment. The waiting suddenly had meaning at that moment. She grew up in the Ronan family since childhood and was very familiar with them. I could tell that she liked Ronan. Well, they grew up together. It would be strange if there was no. I was her interviewer. She was quite surprised. But there are never so many coincidences in the world. It's just that I was the one who was attentive. I understood the tears in her eyes and knew that she was alone and had only one friend. It doesn't matter. From now on, there's also me. No one can resist a cute guy. I approached her slowly, gradually invading her life. We met Ronan and Olivia in Chin City. I had seen them occasionally at banquets and could be considered nodding acquaintances. She grew up in the Ronan family since childhood and was very familiar with them. I could tell that she liked Ronan. Well, they grew up together. It would be strange if there was nothing between them. Olivia even regarded her as a potential rival. From Olivia's behavior, I could tell that Ronan didn't really not care about her. As for why he wanted to show off his affection with Olivia, I didn't care. I just felt sorry for her. Does Ronan deserve her? Hell no. He didn't seem to understand that what Malia lacked was blatant preference, not his ambiguous and self-deceiving love. But it was just right, giving me an opportunity. The plants carefully watered will always bloom. I said it before, no one can resist a cute guy. I closed the 100 Ways to Flirt with Girls sent by my assistant. Perhaps I could try the second confession at the dinner table tonight. I couldn't help it and confessed in the car. She agreed. Yay, sigma greater than or equal to v less than or equal to sigma 8. I went to the Ronan family to pick her up. That old man Ronan must be regretting it. Heh, too late. My flower needs to be protected by me. I've never seen anyone as shameless as Ronan. Can't he understand human language? How dare he touch my girl? After she fell asleep, I tiptoed out, found Ronan, and threw the first punch. The commotion between us grew louder and louder. When she came, actually I was a bit scared, afraid of seeing her, feeling sorry for Ronan on her face. Fortunately, there was no such thing. I'm the one she loves the most. I wanted to take her home. She didn't seem to be ready. What else did she need to prepare? Just by standing there, she was enough to make everyone like her. Ronan was blind. Fortunately, my mom was decisive and came to see her daughter-in-law. Well, my parents were very satisfied. Their youngest son doesn't like men. He just had someone in his heart for a long time. There's a saying, it has to be you. Malia looks so beautiful in her wedding dress. When she came out of the fitting room, I even regretted that I had a low level of education and couldn't describe her with words. We got married. I married the person I had been longing for, Malia. Thank God that she didn't disappear into the vast sea of people. When she was 8 weeks pregnant, I became the source of Malia's vomiting. She would vomit as soon as she smelled me, and later, it even evolved into vomiting just by seeing me. My mom heard about this and without saying a word, took Malia to her own home, leaving me alone in an empty room. Stephen, the young master of the Liu family, the little darling of my parents, had never been so aggrieved in my life. I hadn't touched my wife for 7 days. On a dark and windy night, I sneaked into the villa of the Liu family and came to Malia's bedside. She had been vomiting whatever she ate recently and had lost a lot of weight. I felt sorry for her. Before I could even kiss her, she frowned, opened her eyes, and vomited again. All over me. My mom was sleeping next door. Hearing the commotion and seeing me at a loss, she rolled up her sleeves and started punching me. Stephen, in danger. A big sign was erected in front of the Liu family's villa. Stephen and dogs are prohibited from entering. My mother is allergic to dogs, and my wife is allergic to me. At this point, I can only find some comfort by watching the videos my mother sent me. Finally, when Malia was 12 weeks pregnant, the situation got better. We could kiss, hug, and lift her up high. The baby is born. Malia has fallen asleep. She's really tired. She'll never go through this again. My mother brought Jojo to show me. It's a girl. She's a tiny little thing, all red, like a little fireball. She also looks ugly and wrinkled, not like me or Malia at all. When my mother heard what I said, she took Jojo to the nurse and then rolled up her sleeves to hit me. When you were just born, you didn't look as good as my precious granddaughter. And now look at you, all dressed up and presentable. I was left speechless. Hey, don't abandon a newly born baby. They'll look better as they grow up. Jojo is 5 years old. She looks exactly like Malia when she was little, but her personality is like mine. She's been spanked by her mother quite a few times. This isn't the way home. This little girl is quite smart. Daddy will take you to eat something delicious. She gave me a suspicious look. Where's Mommy? She's at home. We'll bring some food back for her later to give her a surprise. She cheered. Jojo likes Daddy the most. Little girls are so easy to coax. When we got to the private room, I saw Ronan right away. That old man. He takes good care of himself. TSK, TSK, TSK. What a pity. He's all alone. When he saw the little girl in my arms, he was a bit stunned. I took the lollipop out of her mouth and said, Jojo, say hello to Uncle. I just wanted to show off my daughter. Who wouldn't like my little girl? Our business partner praised, President Stephen's daughter is so cute. The little girl replied crisply, because Jojo looks like Mommy. During the meal, Ronan hardly said anything except about work matters. When we were about to leave, he walked up to Jojo, crouched down, and asked, Jojo, can Uncle give you a hug? His voice was so gentle that it gave me goosebumps. The little girl is so outgoing. She's not afraid of people at all. And she's been judging people by their looks since she was little. Right now, she's having a great time riding on his neck. I brought her here to make the old man jealous, not to make them become good buddies. Jojo, if we don't go home soon, Mommy will be angry. Only then did the little girl get down from him and turn to me for a hug. I'll have to ask her mother to give her a good bath when we get home. What a miscalculation. I was the one who got spanked when we got home. Stephen. I asked you to pick Jojo up from school. Where did you take her? How dare you take her to a business meeting? I was enjoying the gentle scolding while the little girl was watching the fun, adding fuel to the fire. Mommy, there were lots of delicious foods there, and a handsome uncle. Didn't we agree that this was our little secret? What kind of little cotton padded jacket is this? She's just like a tattered old vest in winter. Oh well, a tattered vest is still better than nothing, and my daughter is not tattered at all. She's the most beautiful flower-patterned vest in the world.